Okay, thank you. Welcome to the Global Justice Report, an online production of the Center for Global Justice. The Center for Global Justice, El Centro para la Justicia Global, is a multinational and bilingual research center located in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. The center is devoted to research and learning for a better world and empowering a solidarity economy. I will be your host today. I'm Cliff Durand. We have a very special program today. We will be focusing on worker-owned cooperatives and bringing you the film Shift Change, which was a film produced nearly 10 years ago by Mark Dworkin and Melissa Young, both of whom are with us here today and will be available for discussion, your questions and comments after the film. We also are fortunate to be joined by Esteban Kelly, who is Executive Director of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. He's an important leader and creative force in solidarity economy and co-op movements. I do want to say that because of the pandemic, we've discontinued our in-person events and instituted these online webinars, which we do weekly, every Monday at this hour. Without our previous revenue-generating programs, we now depend on your donations to support these webinars and to be able to continue to pay our Mexican staff. You can donate at our website, www.globaljusticecenter.org. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to go right to the film, Shift Change. It's about a 50-minute film, after which then there will be discussion and comments with the filmmakers, Mark and Melissa, and with Esteban as well. So, Roberto, roll the film.
If you look at the history of Cleveland, it was considered a blue-collar town. It was very comparable to Pittsburgh and Buffalo and Detroit, certainly. A lot of that's changed. The manufacturing's not here like it once was.
Companies in this era of capital and job mobility are not really anchored in place. They're not really loyal to the communities in which they reside. And so as companies come and go from our communities, it kind of rips the economic underpinnings.
People losing their homes, the foreclosure crisis here, it's just been devastating. We're at a time in this country with the economic crisis that people are not looking for the same old thing. They say you keep doing the same old thing, you get the same results.
We give incentives to businesses and they come into a town and they say, well, we're going to move here, and we give them some money, and 10 years when the incentive's over, they say, well, what town should we move to next?
It's a familiar story. Industries move away, jobs are lost, and with them a middle-class way of life. It seems to be happening everywhere, but it's not. This is a place where most businesses are owned by the people who work there. Jobs are secure. There's a broad and prosperous middle class. At the heart of the economy are the Mondragon Cooperatives, 120 independent companies, each owned and managed by its workers, joining together for the common good. 84,000 employees, $25 billion in annual revenues. And the region around Mondragon has the lowest unemployment in Spain.
Cualquier empresario del exterior le dirá que lo más importante sea sacar el máximo beneficio. Nosotros decimos que la rentabilidad y el beneficio es importante para sostener a la empresa, pero que también es muy importante la generación de empleo.
Empleo para todas las personas, no empleos elitistas, sino para las personas que incluso no tienen tanta capacidad o tantas habilidades. Pues permitir que las personas vivan. No hacerlo para una generación, sino hacerlo para todas las generaciones posibles.
We believe that it isn't good for anybody if somebody loses their job. If you lose your job, you haven't got money. If you haven't got money, you can't buy. If you can't buy, you can't buy our product.
El reparto de la riqueza más equitativa llega a más personas y por lo tanto más personas tienen la posibilidad de vivir más o menos bien, y eso es importante.
Sí, las diferencias sociales no son tan exageradas como pueden ser en otros sitios, ¿no? La empresa es nuestra, pero somos trabajadores también, ¿no? Entonces no hay como un jefe que pueda haber en otras empresas, ¿no? Todos somos nuestros jefes y todos tenemos que tirar para adelante con la empresa.
Mondragon has a special appeal for people in North America who want to build a more just and sustainable economy.
What a great way to put a company in a community that supports the community. That people would own the business. So the business can't pick up and move unless every single person who worked there said, yeah, we'll move to Florida.
This is a business and we're a co-op. We all have to have a strong mentality that what Evergreen and Ohio Solar is trying to do is going to work for us in our community.
We're linking these businesses to local institutions that are also rooted in Cleveland. They're not going to get up and leave. And if we can win them as our customers, then we have a chance of real stability.
The hope is that over a 10, 20-year period, that we can build a network of 20, 50, 100 companies that employ over 5,000 residents.
The way we have to approach all of these efforts is, are the businesses sustainable? Are they viable? Can they generate profits? Because if they can't do those things, then for those workers, it's going to be a very short-lived endeavor.
An installation like this may take our co-op anywhere from a week to 2 weeks to install.
What's in it for the city is, as these panels produce electricity, their overall consumption of power during the month is reduced because we're actually producing power for them.
When you're the general laborer, you're more or less waiting for someone to tell you what to do. You stick to a regular routine, you come in, you do your work, and the day goes on, and that's it. When you're a part of this co-op, you make choices. You motivate yourself because you're an owner. You have to take the initiative.
Oh yeah, I work this machine, that machine. I'll be all over the place. I can work everything around here. I even do that over there. I do everything around here. Everybody learns everything, so we kind of rotate and move around.
These dryers hold 300 pounds. 300 pounds. You know how you dry clothes and all your heat at home goes right out the stack? The heat goes up, then it comes back down, so we can reuse that heat again. Then it goes back out. Final product.
Being an owner makes it different because then you're looking forward to the future of building something financial. You have some stability, you know, that you can look forward to.
Everyone who works in that laundry today own that company. If they're with us 20 years, they will have a nice piece of capital to take with them. Absolutely. So over time, they'll continue to grow that and create hopefully a retirement pool for themselves and be able to walk away and have sent their children to college and own a nice home.
The idea is not to just maximize the self-interest and benefit for the people today working in the companies, but it's to develop something that has real lasting power over time. And so we've created the Evergreen Cooperative Corporation. On the board will be representatives elected by the individual Evergreen companies, but also by the anchor institutions that are our clients and partners, by our investors, our funders. So it's a kind of effort of many, many different types of people working together collaboratively for the benefit of the common good.
Most people, as with any job, they see it more as a 9 to 5. We have to develop that culture and that consciousness that is bigger than that. You know, it's not just a job. It's not just some place you get a paycheck from. You know what I'm saying?
It's just a blessing. Like to be able to get up every morning and come to work and, you know, go to bed at night thinking I can get up in the morning and go to a job that I really love, something that I have passion for.
La cooperativa está dividida en socios trabajadores y socios consumidores. Es un tipo de trabajo que tomas muchas decisiones. Si estás en una empresa que no es cooperativa, pues hay que hacer lo que te dicen sin decir tú nada. Entonces aquí tenemos la opción de poner nuestras propuestas, decir, hacer.
Todos somos como una familia aquí, trabajamos codo con codo y los problemas que tiene uno los tenemos todos. Tenemos una parte nuestra dejada aquí en esta empresa y si no somos responsables de lo nuestro, pues claro, al final esto no funciona. Yo he sido designado al Consejo Rector pues por mis compañeros, no ha sido de que por estudios ni por nada de eso, sino que mis compañeros han creído que yo soy la persona adecuada para estar en el Consejo Rector.
Nosotros preparamos una serie de decisiones que podamos tomar. Las importantes se descargan en el Consejo Rector y el Consejo Rector es quien las toma. Y hay una serie de decisiones ya más extraordinarias, muy puntuales, que se deciden en la Asamblea.
En la Asamblea, él a pesar de ser gerente, yo ser técnico y él operario, todos tenemos el mismo voto.
Eso es.
Él tiene un voto, él tiene un voto y yo tengo un voto.
Como yo le puedo tirar al gerente y pues si todo el mundo se junta y vota que sí, pues el gerente puede ir a la calle, que es una cosa que dicen, ¿cómo puede ser?
You have an economic stake, you participate in distribution of profits. When you leave the enterprise, you can take with you a significant profit share that has been accumulating over your years of working in the enterprise.
Los que trabajamos tenemos el poder y el capital es solamente un recurso, es un medio, es un instrumento, o en términos económicos el capital es un factor de producción, pero la persona, el trabajo, es lo más importante y es el soberano.
Las cooperativas son empresas enraizadas en su entorno, ¿no? Seguramente ante procesos de deslocalización y demás, son empresas o modos de organizarse que ofrecen pistas interesantes también.
Que al final el objetivo
principal de la empresa es el generar trabajo, para que con ese trabajo podamos generar un crecimiento personal, también del colectivo nuestro, y a su vez ayudar a que se transforme la sociedad.
There are dozens of worker co-ops around San Francisco Bay, including a network of 6 bakeries that were inspired by and named for the founder of Mondragon.
I really like baking. I like working with food and, feeling the heat of the oven and things like that. And it's also nice because it's a creative outlet, which is, I think really essential for the human spirit.
Too often I thought people who were working in progressive organizations, we were trying to protest other things and stop other things, but we weren't trying to build an alternative to that. And to really have a democratic society, we have to have the people who have the democratic values be able to produce bread and be able to produce bicycles and books and the things that we need.
I like having a say in how the business is run. I think that when people share ownership, they take ownership.
We all make the same amount of money. I've been here 13, 14 years, but if someone were to be a member tomorrow, they would make the exact same wage that I do. They have the same amount of voting say at the meetings. It's one person, one vote.
Some people it's an immediate fit, and that's just part of their core personality type. They're vocal, they can communicate really easily, they're willing to give feedback, they're willing to receive feedback.
There are no managers. If anything, everyone's a manager. That doesn't mean that we just make all decisions sitting around in a group. We actually delegate a lot of things out.
Each committee is responsible for different aspects of the business. So for example, finance is responsible for making sure that payroll is done and that all of our vendors are paid on time. And production makes sure that all of our products are looking great and that when we introduce new products, there's a system for that.
The largest cooperative is still the Original Cheese Board. They do about $6 million a year in business, and the mature cooperatives are breaking about $2 million a year. Starting pay is $12 an hour. We provide health insurance for everyone. For one of our mature cooperatives that's been in business for a while, the pay range is about $30 an hour. The buy-in is $5,000 to begin with, $500 in cash, and the rest can be done through payroll deductions.
Sometimes we act as workers and sometimes we act as owners. And as a worker, you want to have the highest wage possible, but as an owner, you realize that for the sake of the bakery, like if sales go down, then perhaps we need to be paid less.
I think it's a great place to learn what democracy means. Maybe when I started, I was a little more idealistic about, oh, we're all going to get along, it's like really great, we're going to own a business together. And
The democratic consensus process takes a lot of work. And if the group is really swaying over to one side, sometimes it takes a moment to go, okay, actually, I'm going to follow suit.
As opposed to normal businesses that aren't cooperatives, there might even be a little bit more conflict on the surface, just because in other businesses, if you have a problem with someone, you can just go to your boss. But here, we're all on the same footing, so you really have to work out your issues with each other.
Listening to others and compromising and not always getting your way is a really big part of, being in a co-op. And for certain personalities, it's not really, that's not gonna happen. I personally believe that no one's perfect, and it's really great to have different points of view and come together. It's not solely yours, it's everyone's, and it's that in itself is kind of a beautiful thing, I think.
Cuando yo llegué de mi país aquí, yo llegué siendo madre soltera de un hijo. Se me hacía imposible no manejar, no hablar el idioma. Era algo bien difícil.
They are treated poorly because they don't know the language. Sometimes not even paid for the work they do. And coming here, there's a safety net.
In Oakland, a nonprofit called Wages helps women develop greenhouse cleaning cooperatives.
Wages provee el entrenamiento, la infraestructura y asesoramiento técnico a todos los niveles. Nosotros les incubamos por 2 años y una vez están sólidos, poco a poco Wages empieza a alejarse un poco, estando a la par en vez de adentro.
En mi anterior trabajo usaban líquidos tóxicos, tan cloro, amonia, y eso me provocaba como alergias. Y aquí no, aquí es bien diferente.
En otros lados o a veces hasta en su mismo hogar otras personas deciden por uno y aquí no, aquí uno decide. A la hora que el negocio va a tomar una decisión, es todo el grupo, nos toman en cuenta a todas, o sea, es por mayoría de votos. Y he tenido la oportunidad de participar en la mesa directiva.
De la mejor manera posible.
Emacico Clean.
We have marketing, we have a budget for marketing, and so they know that when they come here, we are going to fill their schedule as soon as we can.
Let me explain you a little bit who we are.
And that if there is a complaint by a client, we are going to take care of it here in the office.
Me gusta la flexibilidad que hay aquí, mucha flexibilidad. Mis hijos tienen citas en el doctor o se enferman y aquí es bien fácil que me dan chance de ir con mis hijos.
Sabiendo que la limpieza es tan fuerte, requiere mucho músculo y mucho trabajo físico, también sabemos que nuestras mujeres tienen otras capacidades para lograr que estas mujeres no solamente limpien, sino que puedan escalar otros campos.
Yo tengo tantos hermanos que no los puedo contar.
O estar en una cooperativa no era para hacernos ricas ni millonarias, pero sí era para tener un estilo de vida mejor y no poder trabajar para un patrón, sino tener nuestro propio negocio, porque es una cooperativa y es para todas ayudarnos. Incluso cuando ando afuera y necesitamos un ayudante, yo le digo a la gente, ¿en qué trabaja? No, pues que acá ya le empiezo a platicar un poquito y como para que ellas también tengan la oportunidad que yo estoy teniendo.
The cooperatives in Mondragon got started in the years after the Spanish Civil War.
Era un país con unas tasas de paro altísimas. Los vascos éramos reconocidos como pastores en Estados Unidos. La única salida que había para nosotros era la emigración, el hacer dinero en las Américas y el traer dinero aquí.
Había una vivienda para cada 2 familias. No teníamos calefacción en casa. Pasábamos hambre. No teníamos que llevarnos a la boca para comer. Comprábamos boniatos. Comíamos pan de soja. Y actualmente tiene todos nuestros hijos.
Arizmendiarreta llega en la posguerra, en el año 41, ¿no? A Mondragón. Se encuentra un pueblo dividido, deprimido, con muchas necesidades sociales, y lo primero que hace es trabajar con los jóvenes, ¿no?
The cooperatives were spearheaded by a visionary priest with a passion for social justice. He started a school to teach technical skills and nurture a culture of cooperation.
El lema en aquellos comienzos era el de trabajar duro, trabajar mucho y ahorrar para que todo el beneficio económico que se creaba se invirtiera otra vez en hacer empresa y en ampliar las posibilidades para el resto de la comunidad, ¿no?
Hay una época de siembra importante que después da sus frutos, y sus frutos fue, bueno, hay que cambiar esto de alguna forma, ¿no? Hagamos empresas diferentes, ¿no? Y pongamos en marcha la fórmula cooperativa. Es importante, porque tan importante como tener proyecto o tener una fórmula es también tener un sujeto, unas personas preparadas y comprometidas, ¿no? Con todo ello, que doten de sentido a esas estructuras, ¿no?
Antes de hacer cooperativas, hay que hacer cooperativistas. Yo creo que nuestro error ha sido salirnos un poco de los límites que podríamos gobernar no solamente como instrumentos de venta o instrumentos comerciales, sino que podíamos dominarlos como instrumentos de cambiar la mente personal. Que nuestros hijos y nuestros nietos aprendieran de sus padres lo que sus padres han sido.
Gradually more enterprises grew based on this philosophy in the late 1950s, and they joined together finally in 1959 to create the cooperative bank Caja Laboral. But not really a bank, more what might be called a development finance organization, because its purpose was to help the other industrial and service cooperatives develop.
Nosotros no sabíamos hacerla. Nosotros no podíamos hacerla. No teníamos nada de banca. Apenas entendíamos de nuestro oficio, de modo que rehusamos de una forma rotunda el establecimiento de la Caja Laboral. Y finalmente, ¿sabe usted lo que hizo? Cogió el petate, hizo unos estatutos, se fue a Madrid y en septiembre se hizo la Constitución definitiva. Ya tomamos las riendas. Alfonso tuvo que asumir la presidencia y organizar la dirección general, cuando yo no sabía dónde estaba el activo y el pasivo, no lo sabía.
Un banco importante hace ya 30 años fue hablando con el director general de Caja Laboral, Ormachea, quiero comprarle su banco. Y él decía, pero que no es mío, que es de todos, todos tendríamos que votar y no, el dinero lo puede todo, lo podemos comprar, pídame cuánto y yo le compro. Y esa decisión no está en una persona, sino que está, en el caso de Caja Laboral, entre todos los trabajadores y otros tantos delegados que vienen de las cooperativas.
Un principio cooperativo tradicional es la soberanía del trabajo. Quiere decir que el capital es necesario, pero es instrumental. El capital, en nuestro caso, no recibe beneficios, recibe unos intereses. Los beneficios van a los trabajadores en función de su trabajo y a las cooperativas en función del consumo de productos que hacen en el banco.
La democracia empresarial no es sencillo, pero es posible, ¿no? Con todos sus claros y oscuros, pero es posible, ¿no? El norte, ¿no?, hacia el que se quería caminar, ¿no?, a través de las cooperativas, era aspirar a una persona más libre, más soberana, más madura, más dueña de sí misma, en una sociedad también más autoorganizada, ¿no?, a todos los niveles, ¿no?
Through the early 60s, more and more co-ops were created, and additional network institutions were created. The Social Security and Insurance Cooperative, schools and universities, research and development centers. Cooperative governance means that we elect a portion of our board of directors, and if there are significant issues related to the running of the Faculty of Business, we know who these people are, we know whom we elected, and we have relatively easy access to them.
El espíritu que, por ejemplo, ha nacido en Mondragón y que subsiste en este valle de Léniz y sobre todo en todos estos valles, encerrados, acostumbrados y domesticados en el trabajo, y además que son solidarios por sí mismos, que además que son capaces de tener dirigentes que son capaces de vivir, que mientras el peón gana 1, el gerente máximo gana 3 o 5 como máximo.
Y bueno, los sueldos son muy dignos también,
sí,
¿eh? Otra cosa es que se oyen unas cosas por ahí fuera que son estrambóticas, ¿no? Pero que no es que estemos haciendo un esfuerzo ni...
Enough is enough, cuando es suficiente, ¿no? Entonces, para mí, el salario está muy bien. A final de mes te llega la nómina y dices, ¡qué bonito! Pero luego tienes que pasar otros 30 días aguantando pues igual a un equipo que no funciona o que no estás a gusto en un proyecto que realmente no te va.
Si yo solo conmigo mismo puedo tomar una decisión, pues me va a resultar mucho más fácil. Pero el hecho de que si esa decisión implica que otras personas, terceros, tengan que hacer cuestiones que yo haya decidido, pues tendré que explicarles, tendré que implicarles. Si en la toma de decisión participamos todos, luego a la hora de poner en práctica, que es una decisión que hemos tomado entre todos, es una decisión adoptada de forma democrática.
Cuantas más personas participan en la gestión, en la dinámica, lógicamente es bueno para adquirir una posición más competitiva. En el mercado.
En aquella sociedad anónima era realmente la sensación de trabajar para otro, acabar la hora y a casa y se acabó. Esto es algo como que forma parte más de nuestra vida, ¿no? Porque tomamos parte desde la cabeza hasta la cola de la organización, ¿no?
Todos compartimos, tenemos que sacrificar de esos intereses individuales para garantizar la supervivencia a largo plazo de la empresa. No es un enfoque de realizar beneficios y repartírselos, sino es más un enfoque de crear riqueza, de crear puestos de trabajo.
No fabricamos dos máquinas iguales. El 70% de nuestras máquinas hace 3 años no existía. Entonces estamos continuamente desarrollando tecnología para nuestros clientes, siempre buscando el beneficio mutuo, es decir, siempre provocar que con ellos ganen dinero con nuestras máquinas y nosotros también con ellos. Tenemos una organización muy horizontal dedicada a la creatividad, al desarrollo, a ese tipo de cosas, ¿no? La empresa es nuestra. La empresa es nuestra.
Bien, esto es lo que es el travesaño de un torno vertical. Esto sobre todo se usa para piezas de lo que es tema de molinos de viento. Entonces en estos momentos estamos desmontando para que luego en distintos camiones todo sea llevado a Alemania. ¿Sí?
Trabajo básicamente en proyectos para la industria aeronáutica a nivel mundial, principalmente con fabricantes de motores de avión. En los últimos 4 años he sido miembro del Consejo Rector de la cooperativa. Podría decir que ha sido una experiencia muy positiva para entender los mecanismos de funcionamiento y ver cómo se lleva a cabo y cómo se plasma en la realidad pues esa doctrina de Mondragón.
Our niche in the market is really custom machines. The machine we have here is an inspection machine, so it looks at the front of the door using lasers to make sure that the door is square with the rest of the cabinet.
A lot of times people come and say, well, how many times have you made a machine for our widget? It's like, never. Nobody ever has, probably. You know, this is the first time, and that's what we do, and do it pretty well.
We have the coolest jobs around because you're dreaming this stuff up.
I think so.
You're inventing something every day of the week. And you get to invent it out of thin air and then you watch it work.
You're valued for your ideas and your creativity and you know, the things you can come up with that maybe, you know, thinking outside the box, that sort of thing. There's creative juices flowing, I guess, that maybe get stifled in other organizations.
Information is shared and people are involved and get to be part of making decisions, and then they get to benefit from those decisions too, right? It's not everybody has a little tiny cubicle and then there's one guy who comes to work in a helicopter.
we're making business decisions with engineers and wiring people, accountants, machinists, and we really credit ourselves with we run the business.
The members work basically for a share of the business profits. And if we don't make a lot of money, if we don't make any money one year, it's not like we close the doors. Members hunker down. They say, well, okay, what can we do next year to make it better? One member has one vote, period. It's not like in a corporation, a regular corporation, where $1 has one vote.
I have worked at large corporations where there's a huge hierarchy, and it takes a lot of energy to operate in an environment like that. We put our energy towards our projects and our products.
I came here for the sole purpose to work for a workers' co-op. I heard about the place. I worked for a big company up in Fond du Lac. There, it didn't seem to matter how hard I worked or how little I did. It made no difference. I wanted to go to a place where I could make a difference, and I've been here for 17 years. It's the best place there is.
When we get a job, we assign a project manager to that job. They get assigned a team of engineers and assembly people and controls people.
One project, John might be the boss of that project, and the next project, he may be working for one of the people that work for him on that project. So, those roles would flip.
Sometimes the vote doesn't go your way, but at least you heard the decision-making process and you understand why the decisions were made, which that's totally different than most other companies, I think, where a lot of the decisions are made behind closed doors or on a golf course. Or
it takes a lot longer to get to a decision, but then you don't have to convince people after the decision is made that it was the right decision, or tell them why they should participate in it and then monitor their compliance with that, right? They're on board. They were the ones who made the decision. But not all decisions are the same. So if it comes down to a new machine for the shop, people up front in the office are interested in what it's going to cost, obviously. They're interested in why we need it, but there is an understanding that these guys are the experts.
The stress in our jobs is because of what we're trying to do and just the technical difficulty. It's not because a boss is telling you to jump left when you think you should be going right. It's not that kind of stress.
Most other companies, I couldn't share in the decision making because I wouldn't have a vote. At the end of the day, if the work I did produced profit, I wouldn't get to share in that because it would be going somewhere else. If I was concerned about what this was doing to the community, if I worked for another business, that wouldn't matter.
Yeah, in Madison we have some of the oldest worker co-ops. So Nature's Bakery, Union Cab, Community Pharmacy, we've all been around for at least 30 years. Self-organized workers' businesses just make sense. We think more in terms of how do we keep our jobs than how do we improve our bottom line. Now, obviously our bottom line is important because without a profitable business, we don't have jobs.
We offer a full-service prescription pharmacy. We also have a health and beauty section where we have natural beauty products. One of the things I really like is the ability to be able to make decisions as a group and to work things out rather than, a more traditional structure where decisions are made and you may not like them, but that's just the way it is.
I've worked in other pharmacies with bosses, and I've never wanted to be the boss. And also, I grew up went to college in the 60s and the 70s, and it was a pretty radical time. And working in a traditional pharmacy was always harder for me because it's a pretty conservative environment.
It does bring some challenges, I think, to worker co-ops, especially like when you're a co-op and you're striving for this egalitarianism, because pharmacists have, most of them have PhDs now. We have to pay them considerably more than we pay the workers.
All the pharmacists who work here have a different legal responsibility because we have a state license. We need to renew that license every year. The pharmacy has a license.
Yeah, in a way we're set aside from just another worker. But nonetheless, it's not the owner who makes final decision on what drugs to carry, what prescription vials to buy. And this is our ability to do what's best for our patients, the decision we could make. It's not a decision your chain pharmacists are able to make. They get whatever they get.
UNTAP came from a history of labor struggle. The drivers went on strike because of really poor working conditions. The owner was, in the end, forced to sell. The dispatchers and the drivers realized that they had all the skills needed to run the business. So we will be getting rid of all of the gas-guzzling Crown Victorias within the next 6 months or so. We already have 20 Toyota Priuses in our fleet, and it's actually less expensive to run them because of the cost of fuel is our number 2 expense after wages.
Be right on time, 7 o'clock. Yep. It's way better than the corporations I've worked in before. As a member, you're also an owner, and you have the same voice as every other owner. Everybody has one share, one vote. Really makes you feel involved with the business.
Our company trusts us to work in the most productive way for ourselves and the company. And we in turn trust the company not to screw us over.
This is my way bill, my charge slips.
Co-op issues and co-op living have always been part of my life, whether it was food buying co-ops, daycares, credit unions, work environments. The flexibility, the sense of control of being able to have some influence over my workspace. Even though I was in middle management in corporate environments in the past, at the end of the day, the profits went to somebody else and the decision making was done by somebody else.
The oldest and largest Mondragon cooperative is Fagor. 3 generations and tens of thousands of people have made their living here. But when the housing boom collapsed in 2008, so did a major market for their products.
La crisis nos ha afectado muchísimo a nosotros, por ejemplo. Electrodomésticos mucho. Al final que tenemos trabajo, que es muy importante. Muchas veces hay empresas que son capitalistas, si hay un tipo de paro, pues vas a la calle. Tienes trabajo. No te mandan a la calle, digamos, que es muy importante eso. En la época que estamos es muy importante.
With 3 weeks of stock market volatility, Main Street is flashing back to the dark days of the financial crisis.
Las cooperativas no están aisladas, que comparten mercado, comparten competidores, comparten proveedores y comparten el entorno económico.
Ahora mismo tenemos una situación complicada en el mercado, una crisis, y bueno, nosotros estamos cobrando el 80% de nuestro salario, y no hay problema en decirlo, es público, de tal forma que nos faculta mantener puestos de trabajo.
En estos tiempos difíciles, pues ha habido gente que ha tenido que salir temporalmente de la cooperativa y ha tenido que ir a otras cooperativas. Pues un poco nuestra labor en el Consejo Social es que la gente que salga de una manera lo más justa posible.
Las medidas traumáticas que nos ha tocado tomar en los últimos años de crisis, pues de alguna manera ahora mismo yo creo que estamos tratando de tragar eso, pero a la postre llegaremos a esa conclusión. Diremos, joder,
por mucho de que estábamos olvidados, de que decíamos, bueno, cooperativas sí, sí, no, pero ahora nos damos cuenta de que si no tuviéramos el grupo cooperativo o lo que es Mondragón, nosotros la reestructuración que hemos llevado a cabo y todo lo que hemos tenido que hacer, no lo hubiéramos podido hacer. No lo hubiéramos podido hacer.
Existe una gran intercooperación, cooperación entre cooperativas, pasándonos personas de una cooperativa a otra, pasando también fondos, poniendo fondos en común para invertir en común.
UNADO se pone al servicio de esa gestión, intentando intermediar entre esas cooperativas para que precisamente si falta trabajo en una, le podamos dar un trabajo en otra. En algunas cooperativas y se opta por otro tipo de vías como pueden ser las prejubilaciones, pero siempre es una decisión voluntaria. Nunca se despide, nunca se obliga a nadie a salir del sistema.
Today, the Fagor Group boasts manufacturing plants in Spain, France, Italy, Poland, Morocco.
We cannot pay our workers the same rates as they pay in Taiwan or in China or in Mexico. So we have plants in Mexico and we have plants in China, and because we need to compete with other people who also produce in China, and they are threatening to push us out of the market.
Fagor is more than a brand.
La economía es global, entonces hay que pensar localmente, pero hay que actuar globalmente. Y entonces, bueno, habrá países que tengan una mala situación, que tengan años de crisis, y habrá otros países que estén en una situación mucho mejor. Por citar, pues los países de Latinoamérica están con crecimientos muy interesantes.
In some cases, it's a question of customers. In automotive components, for example, the customers are the principal car manufacturers around the world. They can say, if you would like to continue being a supplier to this company, please have a plant in operation within 20 miles of our manufacturing facility in XYZ city in Brazil in the next 24 months.
Otro desafío importante es operativizar a todas las personas fuera del País Vasco. El otro desafío también es la cooperativización de las plantas productivas que tenemos fuera del Estado español.
This is an enormous challenge. These people in the next town have experience with cooperative ownership. They know what their rights and responsibilities are, what the risks and rewards will be. How can we develop the same sense of community with a group of workers in Mexico or in China?
Entonces, si la empresa va bien, pueden ganar dinero. Si la empresa va mal, pueden perder dinero. Eso asusta. La gente está más acostumbrada a que venga alguien y diga, tenemos que hacer esto, vamos a hacerlo así y este es tu salario. Ah, muy bien. De 8 de la mañana a 5 de la tarde. Perfecto. Y ahí es donde no se acaban de conseguir ese tipo de conexión, ¿no?
Los desafíos no solo provienen del exterior, ¿no?, que está alterándose continuamente y que en estos últimos 50 años ha cambiado tanto, ¿no? También ha habido cambios en el propio metabolismo cultural, interno e incluso ideológico de las cooperativas.
Como empresas habíamos tenido un crecimiento muy importante en los últimos años, ¿no? En cambio, en lo que se refiere a la identidad cooperativa, el crecimiento había sido inversamente proporcional al crecimiento empresarial, ¿no?
Nosotros tampoco vivimos en una burbuja aparte de todo el mundo, ¿no? Y pues el consumismo, el individualismo y todo eso pues se va acrecentando también. Entonces, pues sí que se están haciendo ahora unos cursos en todas las cooperativas para volver un poco a los orígenes de lo que era la cooperativa y todo eso.
¿Cuáles las cosas malas que tiene el cooperativismo? Porque todo no es gloria, ¿no? Todo no es bonito, como todo en la vida, ¿no? Y hay cosas que se pueden mejorar y en ello andamos, ¿no? Ahora con reuniones y tal, no sé, a dónde llegaremos.
Tenemos la necesidad de que nuestros jóvenes cooperativistas también estén involucrados, metidos en el proyecto. Esos jóvenes que hoy tienen un puesto de trabajo porque otros señores de antes han trabajado.
Si esta crisis ha demostrado algo, ha sido que hay modelos de toma de decisiones y modelos de hacer empresa que no son sostenibles en el tiempo. Mientras que en el modelo cooperativo hay elementos que permiten que haya una mayor involucración, una mayor participación, una orientación a preservar empleos de puestos de trabajo.
Intramuros, hacia adentro, la empresa debía organizarse en base a eso, ¿no? En base a que el trabajo es soberano y con lo cual, bueno, pues una persona un voto, una organización democrática y demás. Pero no era solo eso, ¿no? Entendían que la empresa no debía ser únicamente para llenar los bolsillos individuales de unos pocos, sino que tenía que tener además una función social.
Es decir, transformar la forma de organizar la empresa, pero también la sanidad y la jubilación y la cultura, de forma que todos estos ámbitos de la vida social sean transformados desde la intuición de la autogestión, de la autoorganización de la comunidad, ¿no?
I work here as an employee, but I also own one share of the company. I have a say in what happens with the company, which is awesome.
If the company loses money, we take a hit, we have to pay. If we make money, we get the profit sharing. So we have a stake, we have skin in the game, as they say. It's a real business, we have goals to meet, but there's just this environment that we all love what we're doing, and it's very meaningful to us, and we all want it to work.
Eco Exchange is best known for our fair trade coffee. Our goal was to make the market work for the small farmer and for these co-ops owned and governed by the farmers themselves.
Once you see how much work goes into picking that coffee, getting it here, the struggles that the farmers go with, you know, they get this little extra social premium for the fair trade price, and they can choose to invest it in clean water, they can choose to invest it in quality improvement, but then, you know, maybe there's a landslide and they have to spend it on roads so that they can get their product to market or so they can get their kids to school.
We're not at the whims of outside investors. That our company won't be bought and sold out from under us, and that as the owners, we can make sure that Eco Exchange stays on mission.
The smartest people that I see on a daily basis are in this building. The most interesting conversations I have in my life are always at the tables at lunch. The biggest challenge that we get is from each other. When you're hired, you're a worker. After a year, you have the ability to be voted into the co-op. Being a worker owner who on some level is supervised by management, who is then supervised by the executives of the company, which is then supervised by the board of directors, which could be somewhat in this group in the worker owner body. That circle, sort of the checks and balances of that system is really beautiful.
Americano. What we're here to do is operate a different kind of business and try to teach consumers the value of a different kind of business. And sometimes that creates an opportunity for us to have a conversation about what sustainable retail food products could look like and what they cost, what the real cost of those things are. And sometimes you've got a line of people and they don't want to have that conversation, and, you know, they say, that's too much, and they walk out the door. As a business owner, I can't say, well, I don't need that person, I don't need their business. So I've got to think about, either evaluating our decisions or evaluating how we message it. Or say, if that means that this isn't the right business for some people to patronize, then that's part of the cost of doing business our way.
Every day we test every roast that we roasted the day before. You grind coffee into the cup, pour hot water on it, and then the grind's actually raised to the top, and then they trap the aroma underneath. And so when you break that crust, you get that first kind of impression of the coffee, which is really intense and exciting.
What we're going to talk about at this meeting is
we've had to learn how to create a place where we could routinely make group decisions where people have faith in the system, even if they don't get the outcome they wanted on a particular occasion.
We got to put the business first. If we're not moving coffee for farmers, we're not supporting our mission. Once we take care of that, we need to kind of keep managing the co-op and actively developing ourselves as owners of the business. We have to. That has to go hand in hand with our day jobs.
So let me ask this question. So, bananas, was it a risk? Was it an innovation?
I would say it was a risk, and it was also a major innovation because it was a new market.
Without allowing innovation or risk, you not only risk stagnation as a company, but you also dampen employee retention.
Like, what are the conditions that encourage risk or innovation? What are the obstacles, structural, cultural, self-imposed?
Imagine you start a cafe and you hire a bunch of baristas, and they're all employees of Equal Exchange now, whether they're on track or not, and then you fail, well, 13 people just lost their jobs.
We have the livelihood of 120, 125 people here at stake. And I think there's a certain knowledge of that and awareness in the back of our heads, like, boy, we blow this one, what are we all going to do for work next year?
What happened? Seemed to have some technical problems.
I don't know, Cliff. Yeah.
How about?
Dampen employee
I'm going to try again.
Okay.
Risk or innovation, what are the obstacles, structural, cultural, self-imposed?
Cafe and you hire a bunch of baristas, and they're all employees of Equal Exchange now, whether they're on track or not, and then you fail, well, 13 people just lost their jobs.
We have the livelihood of 120, 125 people here at stake. And I think there's a certain knowledge of that and awareness in the back of our heads, like, boy, we blow this one, what are we all going to do for work next year?
We have a bigger mission, like we have a social mission, and so if we fail, it also affects the fair trade thing and farmers, and so taking really huge risks affects a lot more people than the 100+ people who work here.
Well, so that makes another point.
Yes, we do have a lot of meetings.
What do you call it, risk?
But if we're continuing to make a difference in fair trade, in coffee, in small farmers' lives, then who's to say that having a lot of meetings doesn't work?
People have offered us a lot of money but said, hey, I want a seat on the board. And they want you to put their financial returns above all other values. We said, you know what, we really need the money, but the board, people are nominated by the worker owners here, and they're elected by the worker owners, and that's our structure. We're not willing to compromise it.
I feel that somebody who believes in cooperativism is much more likely to actively participate in the social and democratic processes outside the cooperative. If you are not willing to be pushed about in your job, you are not willing to be pushed about by a politician, by a policeman, by anybody else who thinks that they've got power.
Cooperatives are growing and expanding into new areas. The United Steelworkers in Mondragon are developing unionized worker co-ops. And delegations are visiting Cleveland, hoping to adapt the Evergreen model for their own cities.
The world is watching, the economy is so bad, everybody, other cities want this to be successful. We own this place. That's an extra reason to go to work, Say like it's a house. If you rent it, not so much, but if you own it, that's a big deal.
I don't know if I could work in a normal company. I'm, spoiled at being able to ask our executive directors how they made a certain decision or tell them what I think about it and not worry about any kind of repercussions. In fact, they'll probably invite me to sit down and talk about it.
Ha cambiado el mundo, pero la empresa sigue funcionando estáticamente con un sistema organizativo y autoritario centralizado como hace 50 o 80 años. Es posible ser empresas rentables y tener como fin último crear riqueza a la sociedad. Ese es el futuro no solamente cooperativo, sino también de cualquier tipo de empresa moderna del siglo XXI.
Soy la segunda generación de una familia cooperativista. Las 3 hermanas somos socias en Fagor. Lo han hecho la generación de mis padres, nos lo han dejado en herencia y tenemos que seguir trabajando para dejar esa herencia a nuestros hijos.
Well, thank you to Melissa and Mark for sharing this film with us.
For more information, which ordering DVD or Blu-ray copy.
We're delighted to have them with us for discussion, as well as Esteban Kelly, who will be with us to answer questions and to update information from the film on cooperatives. Let me just say a word about how to get your questions in. Some people are watching this on YouTube, and if you have a question or comment, you can get it to us by email. Send a message to global.justice.cliff@gmail.com, and I will pass your question on to our speakers. If you are in the Zoom room, and there are a number of people here some of whom were involved in making the film or are in organizations that are featured in the film. If you have a comment or question, you can put it more directly. I have you all on gallery view. I can see everybody. And if you have a question or comment you want to present, just turn your video on and wave, and I'll call on you. So we have time now for questions and comments. I see Melissa waving. She wants to say something, so we'll start with you.
Hi, thanks, and glad to see people here. It was actually kind of fun for us to see the film again. Sometimes people ask, well, why did you make this film? And we were really, really troubled by the inequalities in the US society. And we felt like we could help promote a model of a more democratic type of business. We really wanted people to understand what it was like for people working in such a business. And that's why we went and we talked to people on the ground in all these different co-ops. But in terms of how we actually got started, it was Carl Davidson, who's here with us today, who came up to us at the US Social Forum in Detroit. He said, you know, we need a new film that tells us more about Mondragon in the Basque Country. And I've seen your work on co-ops, worker co-ops in Argentina. And I think you folks could do it. And the music to our ears, I think I can help find you a grant to get started. So I did want to mention that Tony Hara, who is a longtime board member of Moving Images, is here with us today, and he helped film in Mondragon. You want to wave, Tony? And also helped with the editing of the film. And then I have seen at least some people from Equal Exchange, one of the co-ops in the film. There's someone from the CHCA, which is a home care co-op in the New York area, is here. So we've got a lot of expertise, and so I'm really happy that we're having this discussion now. And I know that we all want to hear from Esteban, who is currently the executive director of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, which is doing really a lot of work. I saw David Schweikert, who advised on the film, also was waving his hand. So I guess I have to leave it to Cliff to sort of run this discussion here.
That's okay. I'm glad that you introduced some of the people that you see. There may be others hiding behind blank screens, but anyone want to raise a question or make a comment to start things off? Okay, David, unmute yourself.
There we go. This is really, I mean, I love the film, and I've watched it a number of times. Before retiring a year and a half ago, I'd show it in my classes on a regular basis. But something relevant just happened in the last 2 days, which I wanted to know if you knew about, or if you haven't, you should. The book, a new book, The Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. It's a science fiction book, and Kim Stanley Robinson is apparently one of the leading science fiction authors. It's a novel in the United States, in the world, I guess. And I don't normally read science fiction, haven't in a long time, since Ursula Le Guin. But I got an email a couple weeks ago from Bill McKibbin recommending this book. And it's like, what? Okay, I'll buy it, you know. And it's a long book, it's 500 some pages, you know, and I'm working through it. Midway through yesterday, chapter 58, okay. And it's a short chapter. The narrator, who is anonymous, and there's various narrators in various chapters, starts out by talking about this young radical priest who was nearly executed in the Spanish Civil War, and then got out of that and was sent off to this little town in the Basque region of Spain. And the last paragraph, I'll just read you the last paragraph. And are they a way out, a way forward, a step along the way? We think so. For us, the project is to spread the system throughout Spain, where everyone else may be the world. This is our contribution. We give you Mondragon. I mean, I just about fell out of the chair, reading that. I had no idea that was going to show up in this science fiction book set about 2 decades in the future. The other thing was just something that just came this morning. I do subscribe to the Mondragon has a newsletter that comes out, once a month, and their latest one comes out, and they got a section, what people are saying about us. And there was an article that they quoted, and they were mentioning U-Co-op, Y-O-U-C-O-O-P-E project. And apparently, they're saying they've got a MOOC, an free online course in cooperative entrepreneurship. And I just wondered if you knew about either of these things.
We don't, but it's great to hear.
You gotta read that book, let me tell you.
Esteban does.
I absolutely do. Yeah. So Kim Stanley Robinson has been aware of and inspired by not just cooperatives generally, but specifically worker cooperative formations, and in particular the advent of all the organizing and work to come out of Mondragon. Wow. And it's woven through at least a handful of his novels. So
wow, no kidding. Wow.
The Mars trilogy in the 90s, and a lot of the process around the deliberation for worker ownership, for reaching some sort of alignment or consensus about what's our economic system going to be, set in this dialectical, future where Mars represents this other option, where there's worker self-directed structures that are embedded in the society versus what's happening back on the old planet. And I think that he uses science fiction as a way to render the same choices and options that we have about our society right now and our problems right now, to render them strange and captivating so that we can look at them in a new way, even though it's really, and this is consistent for all of his work, it's really just all about the choices that are in front of us right now.
He's a great writer. It's really fascinating to read.
Yeah, that's right. I'm currently in the middle of a book he wrote actually around the time that this film was made, called 2312, and woven throughout it is this idea of the Mondragon kind of framework, or it's a consortium. So they kind of reference Mondragon as a way of or a political project or an economic project, but a way of organizing society. And it's one of the many different kind of geopolitical actors scattered throughout the solar system who are fighting for little d democracy and a pushing back against some of the capitalistic forces on Earth. So I have not gotten to the end of that book yet, and Ministry for the Future is next. So no spoilers about it. Although I've heard him give quite a few talks about the book. So I think the inspiration for it is very front of mind, even if I'm not familiar with the particular plot points of it.
Following on that, we have a question that's come in from the YouTube audience. This is from Chancey Matthews. In the US, why are co-ops so rare? Is it lack of awareness, or are co-ops fundamentally more difficult to run than a typical small business?
I can take that question unless you wanted to comment first. So there's two parts to it. One, why are they so rare? And then a hypothesis about some of the reasons why. I would start by saying that co-ops, generally speaking, are actually not that rare. I think cooperative culture and some of the guiding principles of cooperation are actually more scarce than the cooperative formation. So everything from mutual insurance, like Nationwide Insurance is a cooperative, a lot of household names, many people who can access affordable housing are doing so through cooperatives. So cooperatives are woven throughout a lot of people, there's like a third of the US population is banking through credit unions. So right, that I wouldn't call that rare at all. And yet worker cooperatives are fairly rare. And our sector's been dogged by that question for a long time. And in fact, all the way back to the founding of the Arizmendi cooperatives in the Bay Area that were featured in the film. I think Tim Hewitt was the person who was speaking at the moment in the film and was saying, hey, what we did here was not just lightly inspired, but it was directly lifted by some of the lessons from the Basque Country and what Father Arizmendi Arrieta was able to accomplish there. And so we iterated on that, adapted it to an American context to see what is it that we could develop ourselves in our own backyard here in the Bay Area. And in fact, the Cheese Board Cooperative had already been around. It predated Arizmendi itself as a sort of incubator consortium that was set up to proliferate specifically through these bakery cooperative models and is now experimenting with other things, landscaping and other kinds of co-ops that they're working with. Similarly, and this also happened just a year or two after the film debuted, we had only formed, our Worker Co-op Federation was only about 7 or 8 years old at the time and founded in 2004. And our purpose really around organizing, developing, collective bargaining, resources, benefits, things like that, a favorable business climate, advocacy for worker co-ops in the US, that was really the bedrock of our purpose here. But we realized, even all the way back to our first board, that we also needed an arm of the Worker Co-op Federation that was directly involved in development in some way. Some of that would look a little more like a think tank or nonprofits, introducing or being a liaison to develop new relationships with the kind of partners in philanthropy and government, people who are doing workforce development programs, people who are doing racial justice work, all kinds of organizing, including in immigrant communities, people who do capitalization or work in the finance world, right? Mapping out all the different partners that it would take in order to scale and develop cooperatives in the U.S., worker cooperatives in the U.S. And so we developed the Democracy at Work Institute as our nonprofit arm, 501c3 arm, back in 2013. And part of the impact of that has been some acceleration of worker co-op uptake and development. I think one of the recent strategies that has been, it's been around for a while, but we've been doubling down on, in part through the efforts of the Democracy at Work Institute and their convening work and leadership, is using a conversion strategy. So taking some of the existing thriving small businesses that are pretty evenly blanketed all around the US, whether it's rural or urban areas, whether it's in the South, in the Midwest, on the coast, all over there are small businesses that are ripe or have the potential to convert to being worker or employee owned. And so we've convened a consortium at this point. I think there's 20 something organizations that are part of it: community-based organizations, community development financial institutions, worker co-op development nonprofits, et cetera, base building organizing groups, some of them that are involved in this work as part of our Workers to Owners collaborative doing this work. So there's a proliferation of strategies. It's what I wake up thinking about every morning, is that question, and what I'm thinking about when I go to bed every night is what strategically can we leverage or unlock around all these different programs. And I don't think that it really simply boils down to awareness, although that's a component of it. And maybe it's something that I'm curious actually to hear from Mark and Melissa, what your perspective on what the role is of narrative and of sharing stories and what that gets us for scaling co-op development in the US. My sense, generally speaking, is that yes, it's helpful for more people to be aware of, less frightened of worker cooperative models, but there's a lot of strategy to who who it is we're trying to reach out to and who could be a catalyst for development. It's informed, for example, some of our work running, again, under our nonprofit side, a fellowship, pulling together people who are embedded in city government, working in local areas. They could be in the economic development departments. They could be part of the staffers for city council members, whoever it is, and doing some of that work in a deeper way, not just educating at a high level, like Art Worker Cooperative is wonderful. Here's some statistics about the income and the wealth building, blah, blah, blah. Here's some examples, whether it's from Spain or Argentina or parts of the US, but actually saying, like, what would it take? What are the businesses that are ripe for this in your own backyard, and what are some of those bottlenecks around financial institutions who are unwilling to lend to cooperative projects or have too many strings attached to it? They might jack up the interest rates of those loans. They might require every single one of those owners to be a co-signer, including all of their assets, their homes, their cars, et cetera, which becomes impossible, right? If you have a business like Equal Exchange, what would it take to have, 200 worker owners co-sign on a loan? I mean, even just logistically, it wouldn't be possible. And there's no financial institution that would be willing to do that. So there's a lot of things that we have been able to start to map out broadly and then come up with various strategies in collaboration. Some that the Worker Co-op Federation does directly, some that our nonprofit affiliate does, many that we do in partnership with our members, especially the developer members or some of the local worker co-op networks. And lastly, a lot that are just informed by whether it's leadership development or other kinds of relationships with our friends overseas. So iterating on what has accelerated cooperative growth in other rich or robust ecosystems, not ones necessarily where the big breakthrough happened 40 or 50 years ago, but to look at models where that acceleration has happened more recently. In some ways that can be really instructive for us. So maybe I'll kick that part of that question to Mark and Melissa, if you have a sense, given that this really is about the work that you've done, and even in hindsight over the last decade since this film has been out, on what the role is of that type of storytelling, narrative, models, stories, anecdotes in accelerating worker cooperative uptake here in the US.
Well, one of the things that I think is an impediment or a blocking of the cooperative models is the emphasis in our society on individualism. We have this society that says it's all on you. If you succeed, you get all the credit, and if you don't, then it's all your fault. And that people don't learn cooperative models early on. I'm glad to hear that Dave has used the film in his classes. I would hope that, in fact, we know a lot of other business schools have used this film so that people, as they're studying business, can even imagine such a thing. So, I mean, I think that this film, was on PBS several years and other things like this can make a difference. But I do think that the work that the US Fed and the Democracy at Work Institute has been terrific. We have watched it. We've known some people who've been very involved in those processes. Some of the innovative things that have now gone on with funding through the Working World and various other things. But I still think that worker cooperative development is not as mainstream an idea as should come up. For example, when cities are thinking about economic development or employment. We have the example of New York, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about that, Esteban, where the city of New York has decided to help fund worker co-ops as a employment strategy, and so on. And that has made a difference, I think, in the development of a strong network and a lot of training on cooperatives in the New York area.
Yeah, right. So that's an example of a successful, I don't know if it's a public-private partnership so much as it is a breakthrough in advocacy, that we had an ally in the role of deputy mayor of New York. And so when the de Blasio administration was first stepping in and there was an opening and there was certainly a need and a hunger for economic change, for addressing what the mayor had run on in his first campaign around that sharp divide, which was one of the first things I heard you say just now, Melissa, about what motivated you all to take on this project. That divide between the haves and have-nots, in this case in New York City, really motivated now Deputy Mayor Phil Thompson, and was part of Mayor de Blasio's campaign. And when they were thinking about what could they do, I mean, this was not a line item in the city budget. It was not a years-long campaign, but the importance of having somebody in a leadership position or in a position of power who was familiar with our model, familiar with the promise, that the deputy mayor had visited Mondragon, for example. I think all of those things mattered. And so when it came down to making some choices around the discretionary budget, we were, of course, it helped to also be organized as a worker co-op federation, which we had only started 10 years prior to that happening in 2014 is when this was taken up by the city council there. But it did help us to lean on city council to identify some champions there. And in the context of a municipal budget in the billions and billions of dollars, in the case of New York City, allocating $1 million of discretionary funding was nothing. I mean, it was an experimental thing for them. And yet we saw just in the course of the first couple of years, we tripled the number of worker cooperatives in New York City. And now, what are we, 6 or almost 7 years into that program, which is somewhere between $3 and $4 million a year at this point, of funding that's going toward the training, education, technical assistance, and some of the other services that you're mentioning through the city's small business services department. We've now seen New York City overtake the San Francisco Bay Area as the largest concentration of worker cooperatives in the U.S. So that kind of breakthrough ended up being instructive and inspirational for some of the efforts of our members in other places, including people in Madison, Wisconsin, who were featured in the film. I saw our former board president, Rebecca Kemble, featured there. She is now on city council in the city of Madison, Wisconsin, which is the capital of Wisconsin. We saw efforts like this in Austin, Texas, in Boston, Massachusetts. I think one of the other strategies we've realized in the US is that sometimes the cooperative model is the thing that has resonance, but there are times where there's more traction around an employee ownership strategy, and it's not necessarily about leading with the cooperative talking point. And I think one of the benefits for us being worker-owned cooperatives is that we can try either way. If somebody is interested in cooperatives in a place like Wisconsin that has the largest concentration of cooperatives, particularly in Dane County, in that congressional district, or in the Madison area in southern Wisconsin, that has a fair amount of traction. Whereas in places like Massachusetts, employee ownership, or in Ohio, which was also featured at the beginning of the film, employee ownership has a little more resonance and traction, or in the state of Pennsylvania, where I'm based. So that we've been able to do some of that code switching, to pull in the kind of partners, some of the national employee ownership centers around the US, and remind ourselves that is where we have scale currently in the US. Not in worker cooperatives, but employee ownership. There are millions of workers that participate in employee stock ownership programs in the US. And of course, there's hundreds of millions of people who are members of cooperatives of other kinds. And so when we pull those kinds of communities together under an advocacy agenda, it's proven to gain some traction, whether that's federally or at a local or regional level.
And of course, as we know, film is a very effective way of educating people about cooperatives. Melissa, Mark, do you want to say a word about your plans for the next film?
Well, we have to get past this damn pandemic first. It's hard to interact with other people and or travel. But we've become aware of a number of places in this country and in other countries in which worker co-ops and labor unions and social justice groups are working together in a clear way, not just informally, but from the start, with a vision of transforming the local economy where they are. So we were at a conference in Cincinnati, of all places, but I shouldn't put them down because they're great folks. In Cincinnati, one woman who's part of the worker co-op consortium there, which is unionized, said before they started a single co-op, they had meetings with union folks, with social justice groups, with people working in the city on providing social services, saying, how can we work together to accomplish a greater goal than just an individual co-op? And what kind of co-op do you think would be a good one to start? What services might it offer, et cetera, et cetera. So we've heard about things like that are happening in Massachusetts, they're happening in the UK around a city called Preston, where people are working with one another to accomplish more than an individual co-op or two, as much merit as they have, but to make bigger changes in the society.
Jackson,
Mississippi.
Another place.
So I wanted to mention one other thing that, in my mind, relates. Something you can't cover everything in the film, in a film. But one of the things that struck me about Mondragon is that the sort of business charter of every single Mondragon cooperative says, more or less, not in these exact words, and probably in Spanish or in Basque, the primary goal of this enterprise is to serve the common good. The next goal is to make a profit as a company. Now, of course, they have to pay their bills or they can't stay in business. But that right out there is saying we're dedicated to the common good really struck me. And after Carl suggested that we might do something that includes Mondragon, and we thought about it and agreed it was a great idea, when we contacted Mondragon and made a proposal to them about coming and filming, they had already said no to Naomi Klein. They had already said no to Michael Moore. Who knows who else they said no to. And I don't think it's because we're better looking, but it may well be may well be the case in the leadership at Mondragon that they thought the time was right. And anyhow, they encouraged us. And what the Mondragon rep said to us, first of all, they wanted some detailed ideas of what we were looking for, what kind of help we would want from them, and some indication that we had support in this country, that people would watch the film and use it if we succeeded in making it. But then when they got back to us, they said, well, the Mondragon folks have decided that if you just want to make a film about Mondragon, we're not interested. But if you want to make a film that will encourage worker co-ops in your own country, we'd love to be a part of it. So that to me suggests, again, a devotion to the common good. And a film that was just about them could get more business from them, for them, or something like that. But they said out loud, what we care about is the common good, basically. And of course, that was the reason we wanted to do it. So it was not a problem. We were delighted to hear that news back. And Tony filmed with us, and they gave us incredible help. It's difficult to find your way around Basque Country, especially if you don't know the area. A lot of people are more comfortable speaking in the Basque language, which we don't. So we had people that sometimes traveled with us or set up appointments. They asked us, what of the Mondragon companies would we like to film at? And we gave them a list. And they did not say no to any of them, but they just helped us make the arrangements.
People might be interested to know that here in Mexico, we have a very interesting worker-owned cooperative. TRADOC is its name. It was formed by the union in a tire factory.
Heard about that.
Who succeeded in, it's a long story, but succeeded in buying out the former private owner of the tire factory, and it is now a worker-owned, unionized cooperative the largest tire producer in Mexico. So that's an example that you might want to think about including in a future film. Do we have other questions or comments here?
Well, just on that last point to Mark, I was wondering what informed your choices. You know, there were 100 cooperatives in the Mondragon Valley to choose from, a lot of whom are actually directly affiliated with the Mondragon Corporation. And you just said that you got your wish list of the workplaces you wanted to visit, including the ones I think that support some of the R&D or the research.
Yep.
There's at least 3 or 4
Yep.
organizations that do that. And yeah, I'm just wondering what that thought process was based on what you had either already known or what you came to know from being on location.
The short answer is diversity. We look, and you know it from watching the film, we pick people of as many colors are available and ages and genders and so on. In the case of Mondragon, it was like, well, we want to find businesses in different industries, different places, some bigger than others, some smaller than others, some that are high tech with lots of machinery, some that are not, because it's our sense, and I'm convinced it's true, that any kind of business could be a cooperative, could be a worker cooperative. It's not just restricted to certain kinds. So we didn't want people to get the idea that you can only do this if you make tires or whatever, right? So that was the main thing. And just reading about some of them, which we hadn't heard, just from their annual reports, some we had not heard of before, we were impressed. Donabot, for example, which does incredibly sophisticated, creates amazingly sophisticated machine tools that they sell to Germany. Germans are renowned for their machine tools, but so's Basque Country now.
Oh, and one of the place that makes the automotive parts, we just happened to see that place when we were in Basque Country on an initial visit. We paid a couple of visits, in order to film. And we happened to see that place because it's near the town of Guernica, or Guernica, we say in this country. And we saw that and investigated, and then also talked, of course, to the communications director at Mondragon about filming there. So some of it is a bit happenstance.
That's great. Yeah, I had seen your film. I own a copy of the DVD. I bought it back when it came out, but so I'd seen the film before I'd ever had a chance to actually visit the Mondragon cooperatives, which I finally got to do about 5 years ago. And it was interesting to me how not just the footage, but the interviews themselves, the perspectives, the voices, the personality. It did end up being a really good primer before going and visiting and having a sense of the importance of Basque culture within the project, the principle of solidarity, the range and the spectrum of all the different things that they're doing there, which isn't just the high tech satellite part for NASA or car part for Tesla, but or even high white goods, kitchen products and things like that, but to really have a broader sense of how they do what they do, and everything from the supermarkets and all the other businesses. So I certainly appreciated all of that and was impressed to find how much I was thinking about your film even once I was on the ground there in the Basque region.
So we saw some people from Mondragon at this conference in Cincinnati. They said it has been incredible, the kind of interest there has been from the US in Mondragon since our film came out. Mm-hmm. Because people, could visualize and right. Apparently has sparked some interest in people to visit there. So
let me give people on YouTube one last chance to get a question in. Again, here is the email address, global.justice.cliff@gmail.com. Send your
Cliff,
questions.
There's a question in the chat that came through. Do you want to read it? And I can
Oh,
answer it. I don't mind answering it.
yeah.
And if I have a chance, I would like to ask a question, so I'll wait my turn.
Okay. All right. You want to respond to the chat question?
Yeah, so someone was just asking, are there any tips or advice that might help cooperative creators to understand dreaded tax structures or how profit sharing happens when they're just starting out? And I would say yes. The problem is that there's an abundance of those things. And so sometimes it's hard for people to know where to start. That's part of why we created a worker co-op federation in our country, is that it makes it a little easier to have a starting place and to be referred out based on what your question is, based on whether it's more on the bookkeeping side or whether it's more of a legal question, whether it's about the tax structure in your state, or whether it's related to the nature of your formation, right? So a startup cooperative is just in a very different position than something that might have been developed from the top down with a lot of capital intensive, all the stuff you saw with the Cleveland Foundation and the Evergreen Cooperatives, very, very different set of tax questions that might be involved versus a co-op conversion, which is, one of the most common. Well, there's still about only 25% of the new cooperatives nowadays are coming from conversions, but that's not insignificant, and that's a lot more than it was 10 years ago. The questions around capital gains and all of that stuff. So we have a monthly webinar that we run. The Worker Co-op Federation runs on the first Friday of every month. We do that year in, year out. We've been doing it for many years now. So that's always a great place if people just in your community are curious, or if they have some momentum, they have a project, or if you're taking the lead on a project, but your friends who you want to get involved in it are like, what are you talking about? I have some questions. Where do I get them asked? Just come to our monthly startup webinar. It's on the first Friday of every month. Information about that is on our website, which is just usworker.coop. And then there's all kinds of resources. I was saying many of the CPAs, bookkeeping cooperatives, nonprofit advisors, they're all plugged into our membership. And we have a peer technical assistance program. So basically the kind of people, including literally many of the people you saw in that film, are certified as advisors, technical assistance advisors from a worker ownership background, who can help people with, we subsidize technical assistance. We either pay for it out of grants or just out of the membership dues that we have, or sometimes just pro bono. Sometimes we either volunteer from our staff side, or for some of our members, we'll volunteer time to help people with questions like that.
Okay, there was a voice that had a question. I didn't see
Yeah,
who it
hello,
was.
it was me, Julie Durand. First, I want to
okay.
say thank you to the wonderful film that we watched today, but nothing really much has been said about the third world countries that are my preoccupation. Perhaps Cliff Durand, Center for Global Justice, can give us a little understanding of what is happening, especially in the state that I live, is the state of Guanajuato, where the majority of men are migrating to the north to work for peatlands. I saw Argentina, I saw the Basque countries, etc. But what about third world countries in Latin America? So you can answer that, Cliff.
Well, thank you, Julie. Well, the Center for Global Justice has as one of its missions to promote cooperatives. One of our Mexican staff people is a cooperative educator and trainer. So we've helped to educate people about co-ops. There is, in Mexico, there's a unique situation in that we have the ejido system that is as a result of the 1910 revolution. The haciendas were broken up and land was turned over to campesinos to own collectively, so that around a community, the land is owned by the people in that community. And that kind of collective ownership, you would think, would create fertile grounds for the formation of cooperatives. Unfortunately, it generally did not. Generally, what happened was that the members of the ejido then divided up the land to each cultivate it as if it were their own private property, even though they didn't own it, but they had guaranteed tenure over it. So, but there are a few examples and of successful cooperatives that have been formed here in Mexico, rural in character. And we have a film on one, a documentary that the center produced on Tolantongo. It is a campesino-owned resort. And in April, I believe, we will be showing that film. So that stay tuned, and you'll be able to learn about a rather unique and quite successful campesino-owned cooperative here in Mexico.
I want to just add to that Equal Exchange also works with cooperatives in Latin America as well, and we work with CESMACH in Mexico. And so our model includes us being a worker co-op, but also only working with cooperatives abroad. They obviously look different in every country, but we found that in rural communities where folks are trying to kind of get together and collectively sell their coffee, in order for that to happen, they really need to have the volume to be able to sell to someone like Equal Exchange. And we're only medium sized, never mind much bigger. And so it's proven to be really beneficial for folks to get together cooperatively, really the only way to kind of gain market access, and also marrying the fair trade system, which is kind of a whole nother story. But we do also work with cooperatives in Latin America, and you can check on our website for all the different countries. We have all of the cooperatives listed too.
Melissa.
So Esteban, it's been my impression that some of the big growth in worker cooperatives in this country in recent years has been immigrants, women, younger people. I don't know if you want to comment about, where the new co-ops are developing in terms of different parts of the population or certain activities that they do. And also maybe a word or two about how co-ops are doing with the pandemic. I mean, we have heard from some different co-ops that we have some relationship with. Times are really hard for some of them.
Great question. I'll put a link in a minute to a report that we released back in October about covering the first 6 or so months of the pandemic in the US and its impact on worker cooperatives here, which is mixed, but mostly better than the traditional business, as you would expect. But to answer the first part of your question, I don't know that there are very clear. Growth is happening everywhere, and that's part of the phenomenon of having an amazing model that addresses all of the social and economic problems and some of the environmental ones in our society, and starting small, which is that there's nowhere to go but up. So everything is growing, whether it's old, young, caring economy sector, transportation, food and agriculture, I mean, all of it. So tech, but I think you're right that there still is some clustering. Part of that is because co-ops beget co-ops. So if you're one of the first ones in a certain field, it's going to take longer to develop. It's going to take longer to get the next couple who are doing that with you. Once there's a community of you, it inspires others. It becomes easier for others who have that idea to be like, oh yeah, we're just doing what that tech co-op does, or we're just doing what that grocery worker co-op does. So that's another thing. And we actually organize in that way as the federation. We have industry-based peer networks where we say, oh yeah, if you're doing landscaping, let's connect you to some of the other co-ops that do landscaping. Like the part of the cooperative principles, right? The sixth principle, cooperation among cooperatives. And you just saw an example of it in real time in the chat from Equal Exchange. Hey, how can we help? We're here to help. Yeah, we're running a business, but also this is part of running our business in a cooperative way. So part of that growth is also that the more co-ops you have, the quicker that growth accelerates. And I think, 10 years ago when you made the film, I was a board member with the Federation. And I don't even think we had 100 members at the time. And now we just broke 300 members by the close of 2020. And in fact, we grew, I think we recruited something like 50 new members, more than 60 new members over the course of 2020, which was otherwise a horrendous year for a lot of reasons. So, okay, yes. For startups, I would say that tends to be more concentrated for younger, millennial, whatever, entrepreneurs, especially in certain industries, ones that are not very capital intensive. That could be service sector things, catering, language services. I saw someone from the Interpreters Cooperative in Madison here on the call. Things like bookkeeping, tech, web development, some of that kind of work. So that tends to be one. Then there's this sort of like medium capital thing. So landscaping, construction, those are also really great industries to be in. It's not going away, and everyone is looking, especially when you're looking at a residential level, so not necessarily doing landscaping or construction for a university, which properly would be probably a gig for a union contractor. But if you're talking about smaller scale residential homes, things like that, small businesses even, there's a great model there for and a niche there, either for doing those services around construction, landscaping, whatever, or in the case of one of my former board members in Cincinnati, they started a cooperative that produces sustainable insulation. So there's no reason to put that pink stuff, the fiberglass, in your house, that you can actually have insulation that's sustainably, right? So thinking about the value chain, and it's new, but our field is just starting to catch up to that level of adaptation. And that's one of the things, if I had in my wish list of what is it that I would like to see happen in the US, it is less of this, here's my dream project of some like really attractive retail service facing, cafe co-op kind of thing, and more of this behind the scenes logistics. Groups like Brooklyn Packers, which is based in New York City, they're not doing food service that is front facing. They're doing food prep, packaging and processing of things to turn the raw food into something that is value added. And they can then source to a whole set of other businesses, including cooperative ones, right? That's a great market niche, and we don't see enough of that kind of innovation happening. Conversions, I was starting to say, have been gaining a lot of momentum. And so that path to worker ownership, it's not that it's a new business, but it is newly cooperative. And so there's an opportunity there. I think demographically, most of the audience here is familiar with this. That is tapping into the potential for aging, retiring business owners in what has been called the silver tsunami, who don't have a succession plan. And we're talking about 300,000 businesses a year that are closing up without a succession plan. Their kids don't want the business. There's no single worker who they've been, paid whatever, 15 or 20 or 30 bucks an hour for however many years. They don't have the kind of savings to buy a $4 million business. But that process of converting it and selling it to all of the workers with a little help from our members who do financing, technical assistance, et cetera, that's another one of the paths to it toward employee ownership that's scaling. And then you just mentioned, and this is absolutely one of the predominant trends for the last 10 or 15 years, the model has been scaling in immigrant communities. And immigrant communities are not evenly spread throughout the country, of course. But I would say that whether it's urban or rural, whether it's in a state that's predominantly white or not, there's uptake for immigrant and even refugee cooperative development all over the place. So refugee co-ops are more popular in a place like Maine or in the Twin Cities or in Colorado. There's places where there's concentrations like that. But of course, you know, concentrations in places like New York City, in California, in Chicago, which is a newer worker co-op ecosystem, but there's just a lot of momentum and organizing partnership with some of the worker centers, workforce development, and other community-based organizations, and even just some of the people who are forming local or regional worker co-op networks or nonprofits. So we call them our federation partners, right? We're a national group. We have some local chapters that we're experimenting with, but some of our members have self-organized their own chapters going back 10, 15 years. Some of them predated us in places like the Bay Area, where there's been a concentration of co-ops for such a long time. And so a lot of those groups have been doing direct work. I think the model that a lot of people are looking to and learning from, not just in the US, but even internationally, one of the places where other countries are turning to the US and saying, hey, wait a minute, y'all have figured something out that's interesting and that's scaling, is around developing worker co-ops for immigrant workers. So groups like the Center for Family Life in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, they've been on our board for many years now, are now being sought after to give workshops and to speak to people in the UK, or people in the ILO, people who are incubating co-ops in Lebanon, in Muslim majority countries. They're like, how do we incorporate some of the people who are precarious workers into the benefits of economic growth and prosperity, which doesn't need to rely on the same kind of unpredictable support in the form of social aid or services, or the kind of backlash that they're seeing in Europe from certain right-wing governments. How do we de-link from all of that by building our own self-reliance, right? So a lot of that has been instructive for people in other places. I think lastly, because it's Black History Month, I got to say this, and happy Black History Month, everyone. There has been a renewed effort, probably just in the last like 3-4 years, and it's just doubling down each year after year, to build up and to strategize and to problem solve. What does it look like to scale worker ownership in Black communities, and to a lesser extent, Indigenous communities around the US. The Democracy Collaborative has done some work with Indigenous communities. We, along with groups like the Democracy at Work Institute, Seed Commons, which is kind of partnered with the working world, have been doing a lot of work to figure that out, because there's not any one recipe. You mentioned Cooperation Jackson and some of their political education and some of their theories of having a dual strategy to win political power through electoral office, and then link that up to a social movement that is incubating Black worker cooperatives within that ecosystem. So there's a lot of different models for what this has looked like. Places like Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., that have a long history of programs. I think the thing that we figured out is there's a lot of work we need to do to unroot assumptions based on white supremacy culture that cooperatives generally, and maybe worker co-ops within this, but that cooperatives generally have been a model for white people, mostly well-off or affluent white people who wanted to opt out of traditional capitalist enterprises and to luxuriate in the liberating structures of being their own bosses. That actually, we have shifted from co-ops being a way to opt out of the economy, to being a way for people who've been left out to opt in to the economy, whether that's undocumented workers, immigrant workers, and certainly Black workers have been part of that tradition. It starts with political education. Some of the seminal scholarship of Dr. Jessica Gordon Nembhard from John Jay College, and her scholarship really digging up and resuscitating our own traditions of African American worker cooperative history and solidarity economy organizing going back 150 years in this country that was erased, whether willfully or implicitly, through a project of white supremacy culture that says, this is a model that only really pertains to white people. And so part of the uptake and the code switching within Black and Brown communities has been reorienting around that and claiming and remembering that our own history of civil rights organizing in Black communities in the US has been tied to those same leaders were all involved in worker cooperative and solidarity economy organizing all the way back to the especially the 1920s and 1930s, but even back to the formation of the history of labor unions and worker cooperatives in the middle of the 19th century in this country. It was a big question, so there's a lot to say. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks so much. So
you should know that next month we will have a webinar with Jessica Gordon Nembhard. She will be talking about the role of Black women in the formation of cooperatives. There is a rich history there that is little known, but if you come back and join us on I think it's the 22nd of March, as part of Women's History Month, we will be presenting a webinar with Jessica.
Absolutely.
Great.
And I forgot to say, Melissa, that in the data that we've been gathering, we've started doing an annual census of worker co-ops because in our country, the government doesn't do it for us. Unlike Spain or Italy or Argentina or Canada, we have to do it ourselves. So all of your donations and support help us with that. Those of you who are interested in supporting worker co-op development in this country, you can go to our website. But we have found in our research that about 68%, so close to 70% of worker owners in the US are women. And about 2/3 of worker owners in the US are people of color, of whom a majority of whom are Latinx and otherwise, I think a lot of the demographics pretty much map onto demographics of the US as a whole racially. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I had just two quick announcements. One is there's a great film on PBS tonight called 925. It's a documentary about women in office work by Julia Reichart, and it's very good. I've seen it. And then the other thing is that I just learned this morning there will be a webinar on union co-op webinar on Friday, February 12th. And this is run by the Union Co-op Council of the US Fed. No. So, oh, good.
Doesn't say US Fed.
There's the information on that Melissa sent.
Yes, yeah. So those are my two quick announcements.
I wonder if Carl Davidson would want to say a word about the resources available on the online University of the Left. Is there material there on cooperatives that would be of particular interest to this audience, Carl?
He left.
Did he just leave?
Yeah.
Yeah, you missed him.
Oh, he was here a minute ago.
Yeah, you missed him by like 3 minutes.
Oh, sorry.
But you can search for it online, right? And you'll find it. You'll find the online University of the Left, and then you can learn. A great suggestion.
Okay. Any other resources that people should know about?
Yeah, you should, again, if you're interested or if you're just opening the conversation with somebody maybe in your life, in your community, maybe an elected official about employee ownership, we set up a website. This was mostly done by the Democracy at Work Institute and some of the other partners in the Workers to Owners Collaborative, called Becoming Employee Owned. And it collects, I mean, this is the perfect audience for this because it collects stories, very like bite-sized stories. Some of them have little Vimeo, like 4-minute documentaries or 10-minute documentaries from people who have converted from being workers to owners, or from businesses that spun off or incubated a cooperative. They said, hey, we do X kind of work. We need to source that, we need videographers. And so they just incubated and spun off their own cooperative business that could resource some of their needs. That could be in the food system, other industries. So if you go to becomingemployeeowned.org, there's stories there, there's pictures, biographies. It's broken down by category. So you could look at the food and beverage category, the arts and culture. There's like different industries that collect some of those stories.
Great.
And if you would like to support Melissa and Mark in their film, you can make a donation to Moving Images. Here's the information. You can go to by PayPal. You go to shiftchange.org and hit the donate button. They would be happy to receive any donations you might be able to give. Okay, any last comments from any of our speakers or those involved in the co-op movement here? We need to wrap this up. We've been going on for over 2 hours.
But just thanks to the center for raising the idea of doing this webinar. Thanks a lot.
Well, and we want to thank Melissa and Mark for sharing their film with us so that it can reach this audience. And also special thanks to Esteban for his contribution to our discussion. I hope that our audience has enjoyed this discussion and benefited from it. Next Monday, our webinar will be What is Socialism Today? Featuring Ronald Aronson. And I think you'll find out, clearly socialism is a term that now has become more acceptable to many people, although the radical right still speaks of it as if it's a dirty word. But in the effort to rehabilitate a more nuanced understanding of socialism, I think you'll find next Monday's discussion with Ron Aronson very informative. And we have other webinars coming up. If you check our website, you'll see a schedule. We have a webinar on class and race coming up, one on the unchecked expansion of executive power. We have a webinar on imperialism in the global South. And then in March, we have 3 programs marking Women's History Month, among them the one with Jessica Gordon-Nemhart. So hope to see you again next Monday. And so this is Cliff Duran now signing off.
Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Esteban.
Cheers.
Yeah. Talk to you soon, I hope.
Absolutely.